Today you'll hear my conversation with film producer and plastic pollution campaigner Jo Ruxton. Jo began her work in marine conservation back in 1990 when she joined WWF in Hong Kong to begin their marine conservation program. During her time at the WWF, she was instrumental in bringing in new legislation and setting up 4 marine protected areas. Jo was also a lead member of the BBC Natural History Unit's diving team and has been producing and directing underwater sequences since the first days of filming on the award-winning Blue Planet series in 1997. During her 12 years at the BBC, she was involved in numerous underwater films from Antarctica to the pristine reefs of the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean for the BBC and the Discovery Channel. After leaving the BBC and learning about the plastic problem in 2009, Jo decided to combine both careers and produce a documentary feature, A Plastic Ocean. The film was released globally in January 2017. Jo co-founded the Plastic Oceans Foundation as a registered UK charity in 2010 to help the fundraising process, but more importantly, to continue the legacy and message of the film beyond its release. I'm your host, Gian Avelli, and on the show, we uncover the stories, tactics, and skills of people doing great things for the planet. If you're inspired by my conversation with Jo Ruxton, please remember to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with anyone you think would love to join our community. Did your upbringing motivate you to act? Was it epiphany? Was there some sort of single moment where you thought, this is what I must do?
It definitely wasn't an epiphany. I've always loved anything to do with the ocean. As a child, I had 2 favorite books. One was about a mermaid and the other one was The Water Babies. But I didn't actually learn to swim until I was 7, and we went to live in Singapore. And that was the first of 7 islands that I've actually lived on in my life in 5 different countries. So the sea has always been a big part of my life. I've always loved swimming and snorkeling. And when I learned to scuba dive, that was just like another world opening up for me. So yeah, it's almost like it was in my blood. It's just something that I've always felt a connection with. And even though my conservation career came later in life, after I'd had my family, it just felt like the right thing to do.
You previously mentioned that society's relationship with plastic isn't as simple as just stopping, and that plastic at the time was an innovation, incredible innovation. Do you think there's future potential from the innovation itself?
Yes, there's always potential in innovation, but what I wouldn't want to do is rule out the use of plastic. Plastic is actually an incredible product. It was designed to last forever. It was designed to defy nature, so it won't decompose like other things. That, of course, is the root of the problem with single-use plastics, because you can't throw it away. But as a product, it's been an incredible invention, and it's saved nature many times. Just to give you a simple example, I do a lot of talks to schools around the world. And in primary schools in particular, the children are always sitting on plastic chairs. And there's been so many hundreds, probably thousands of these definitely thousands that I've spoken to. And I just think if all of those chairs were made out of wood, how many forests would chop down just for our furniture? When you think of the veneers and all the things that we can use now that act and look just like wood and other products, but we're using plastic because it lasts a long time, it's cheap, it's easy to clean. And certainly in medicine, there's absolutely no alternative. And 2 of my granddaughters were born prematurely. And I think without the plastic, even single-use plastic in that instance, to help them breathe, to feed them, to bring medicine, tubes that were changed constantly to prevent them from getting infection, I think plastic has saved life and it's saved nature. But what we shouldn't be doing is making disposable, throwaway items out of it just to make our lives convenient, because in the long run, it is the biggest inconvenience we could ever have created.
And so on the 1st of October, UK-wide ban on plastic straws, cotton buds, stirrers came into effect. So essentially means that it's now illegal for businesses to display or even sell these single-use.
Yes, that's right.
While these policy measures are certainly a step in the right direction, they seem to be only touching the very surface, like tip of the iceberg. Uh, what other legislative changes do you think need to happen to make transformational change? And how can business leaders and citizens support this?
I think the way that people can get on board with this and support this and think about change is to understand it. And that was one of the reasons, one of the key purposes of making our film A Plastic Ocean. I didn't know what the solutions would be, but I just knew that if we got the right people understanding why we shouldn't be using plastic for so many ridiculous single-use items, why we need to change our behavior, then all of the clever people would come forward with innovation. And I've been amazed at what has happened. The idea of the straws and the coffee stirrers, yes, it's not going to make a huge difference overall, but it will make a difference. And most of all, it will make people think, why are we banning these? You know, you think about, well, take the example of coffee stirrers. You go into a takeaway shop, you grab your coffee, you stir the thing for seconds, and you throw it away without thinking about it. And that little coffee stirrer will probably still be on the planet when your great, goodness knows how many great grandchildren are around, just because for a few seconds you stirred your coffee with it. And where's it going to go? You know, it'll go into the environment, it'll break up into little pieces, it will get into the food chain, it'll attract chemicals, simply because you stirred your coffee and didn't use a spoon that could be washed up afterwards. So it's very much getting people thinking about single-use items, and those are things we see all the time. To think about legislation, I would certainly be looking at, and I'm sorry to say this with Christmas coming up, but glitter. Glitter is tiny pieces of plastic, and it's in makeup and it's in artwork and all sorts, and it goes down the drain. There are alternatives. There's edible glitter. So there's glitter that can be created from plant-based products that won't do the kind of harm that this is doing. So that's something that could be changed. But the one that really gets me is plastic water bottles. Buying water in a plastic bottle just seems the craziest thing ever. And the reason we started doing it is because in the 80s, there was a lot of information about how much sugar there is in carbonated drinks, and the sales started to plateau. So some bright spark said, I know what, we'll bottle water. And everyone's going, yeah, right. You said, no, we'll tell people it's better for them. And then we'll have celebrities running around with their bottles of water looking all cool in their tracksuits. And suddenly we were all doing it. And by we, I mean me as well. I have bought bottled water. I would say that in certain countries where you can't get clean water, then absolutely there's a need for it. But in countries like ours, where everybody can turn on a tap, I just think it is ridiculous that we're allowed to sell it, because we know the harm that it's doing. We know that chemicals will be transferred into that water. So why on earth are we doing it? Why are shops still selling it? Why are people still demanding it? That kind of thing, I think, should be legislated against in any country where they have potable water in their homes.
And if I may lead on to that point, there seems to be like a lot of these tokenistic acts that are often promoted, such as like switching to reusable coffee cups,
Yes,
taking reusable bags to the grocery stores. And
yes.
sometimes it feels like it's a band-aid solution to the irreversible damage that plastic has created. This can often lead to feelings of disempowerment, just because of the sheer scale of the actions that the individual might not be able to match up to. And so as individuals, what would your advice be on tackling the war on plastics? What other things can be doing above activism, education?
Yes. I think, first of all, don't feel overwhelmed by it. Don't feel that the little actions you take won't contribute, because they absolutely will. And everything that you do, think of that magnified by 10 people that you know. Think of that magnified by 10 people that they know. It will make a difference. Demand for plastic bags has gone down by 90%. And plastic bags used to be one of the key culprits that we were finding in the environment. So it will make a difference. And we can only do what we can do. But I would rather we had most of the people doing something than very few people going plastic free. Because the one thing that everybody does, if everybody took their own cups and took their own bags, that would make a vast difference overall. So don't feel just because you're one individual that what you're doing won't make a difference. It absolutely will. And everything you say to others about it will. What's amazed me has been the power of the young children in this whole movement. When I was living in Hong Kong, I used to work for WWF doing marine conservation, and we did a lot of education work with the young kids, but I used to somehow feel frustrated because I used to think, well, if we're teaching the children, we need these changes now. We don't have the luxury of waiting for them to grow up and become policymakers and change makers. I didn't actually, in my head, give them credit for how powerful they could be. I am amazed at the difference just talking to kindergarten children makes, because you hear the feedback later from their teachers and the parents and how these children have been influencing them and not allowing their parents to forget their plastic bags and not allowing them to buy things. And it makes a huge difference. And I know that from the feedback, but also from going to schools now, the difference between going now and going 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was a new subject. The kids were all wide-eyed, wanting to know what was happening to the sharks and everything and what's happening in the ocean, but they hadn't even thought about it. Now I go there, they can't wait to tell me what they're doing. The hands are going up, there's projects happening. It's really heartwarming to know how we've got through to them. But also the first ones are now 10 years older. They will probably be, some of them, in their first jobs, talking to others, getting to a state when they really can make a difference, and everybody can. There's incredible work going on with individuals of all ages, and it's the influence that you have that will make the change. And it's happening already. Behavior change is absolutely happening on this one.
Those younger generations are going to grow up to be the future leaders of
Yes.
businesses, creating the policies. So it is a matter of time. The Guardian recently warned against being a climate doomer. What balance do you think we need to strike between damage we have done so far and the optimism for the future? How do we bring people along with us in an inclusive way so that people don't lose hope in the face of this crisis, especially if the younger generation are adopting it now? How do we as older generation make change now?
It's a difficult one to get right, and it's one of the problems certainly that environmental filmmakers have, because you want to tell people what's happening, but you don't want them to be overwhelmed by it. And certainly in the case of something like ocean acidification, I find it very hard to think about that. And my sort of coping mechanism is to switch off and not think about it, because dealing with the reasons that is happening, the whole climate thing is a problem. I mean, I have a hybrid car, and that's, you know, and I walk an awful lot more now, but we still have to be realistic, and we don't have, you know, solar powered cars and things yet. But what I would say is there is incredible hope. There is hope now. We can still turn things around. And we are the generation that can do that. And by generation, I mean anybody who's on the planet now. It's a critical time for us, and we can work together. It's not impossible. We just need to follow the steps. And it might be very difficult, certainly in countries where the leaders, for them, you know, the climate just isn't on their agenda at all. But there are enough good people out there. There are enough good leaders talking about this. There are still things to do, and that's what we mustn't lose sight of. Certainly with our film, I knew I had to show some of the very perhaps difficult to watch scenarios. For example, seabirds being cut open, and you can see the stomachs bulging before the biologist even, you know, makes the incision, and you can see all the plastic inside. We had to show that so that people would start to realize, you know, this is real. But I wanted the end of the film to be full of potential solutions. And even though looking at it now, it's a little bit out of date, there are solutions, and there are new ones coming all the time. And the same with the climate initiative. There are so many things that can be done to combat this, but we need to work together now. We know as a generation, what I think what Dr. Sylvia Earle, one of my heroines, says, you know, this is our watch on the planet. We can make a real difference here. And certainly the children that I speak to are absolutely all over this. And hopefully enough of the adults and the policymakers will be as well. I don't lose hope at all. A lot of people say, don't you get depressed? No, I don't, because I see the changes. And I really believe that we've come so far, and we will with the climate, or we can with turning around this climate crisis as well.
So David Attenborough named your award-winning documentary as one of the most important films of our time. Could you briefly take me through the journey of creating the documentary and the new findings that came out of the experience, and what would be one thing that you'd want people to take away after watching the documentary?
It was a very long process, actually, and the whole purpose of the film changed as I started to find out more and more about the whole problem. When I first decided to make it, I'd heard about something called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which was described to be a floating island of plastic 10 meters deep in the center of the North Pacific Ocean. And so the whole film I'd planned was to be about that. I then went on a recce to go out there, spent a month out there, and realized that there is no such thing as a giant floating island of plastic. The water looks as beautiful and blue as anyone would imagine the Pacific to be in their dreams. But what you're not seeing until you put a plankton net in is the microplastics. And that's the true nature of it. Microplastics that are mixed with the plankton. We did a count there actually of living planktonic organisms that we could see, and there were 26 times as much plastic as there was to those little animals. But that was in the center. It got worse. We started trawling about 400 miles west of San Francisco until we got to the center, and every single net was choked with plastic. And that made me realize this isn't as simple as a big island of plastic, which could, with enough people and enough power, actually physically remove it. You can't, because you would take all the tiny animals that are heart of the food chain and the plants that are providing much of the oxygen that we breathe and absorbing the carbon dioxide. So the problem suddenly changed. But the other thing I learned on that trip was how the chemicals from plastic leach out of it, but also plastic particles gather chemicals in the ocean. Things like DDT that was banned in the 70s, a cancer-causing product, it's still out there in the ocean, and plastics soak it up in a heartbeat. And the minute they get into the ocean, they start to attract these chemicals. So you might think when you eat a fish that you're not eating the guts of it, but actually when the fish eat those particles, the chemicals on them are released and stored in the fatty tissues of those animals. And these chemicals have been linked to all sorts of critical disease, such as cancer, autoimmune diseases, cognitive behavioral problems, infertility. All the things we hear about now that are on the increase have been linked to those same chemicals. So suddenly I learned something about plastic. It wasn't just an eyesore. This is actually a threat to not just human health, but of course the health of the ocean and everything in it. So it became a much more important message to get across. It's not just, get rid of this plastic. I don't have to see it. Actually, it's not that easy. I think the one thing that I would like people to understand is that plastic was designed to last forever. You can't throw it away. There is no way. You can't just keep recycling plastic, because plastic can only be recycled about 10 times, and that's in the best case, the PET. Plastic loses quality every time it goes through the system, and you would just end up with a very dark color plastic that's very hard and nobody wants it. And then what do you do with it? And yet we're still producing it exponentially. So I want people to understand this product was designed to last. It's an incredible product, but we should never be using it for single-use items. And there are so many things you can do in your everyday life to make changes. Not just your bags and your not buying water in plastic bottles. Think about when you buy butter. You have a choice of buying it wrapped in paper or buying it in a plastic butter dish. And when that plastic butter dish, when it's empty, what do? You throw it away, and then you go and buy another one. Why not just buy it in paper? And if you do keep it in the fridge and you don't like hard butter, then use a potato peeler and you'll get tiny little thin strips that you can spread on your bread. There's so many things like that you can do. We've all got used now to liquid soap, but if you buy solid soap, it's cheaper, it lasts longer, still smells gorgeous, and most importantly, it gets you clean. And I've rediscovered the joy of storing it in my clothes, so when you get your clothes out in the morning, they smell lovely. And you can't do that with a plastic bottle of liquid soap. So there's lots of things that we can do to make those changes. And once you start, you'll find all sorts of other ways. And then you feel good about what you're doing. You feel like you're contributing. Why are you buying that? Why buy washing detergent in a plastic bottle when you can buy a cardboard box with powder, and it still gets your clothes clean. So lots and lots of different ways that we can address this and be part of the solution.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. So many great tips and tricks there that are not secrets. That, you know, these are
No.
things that have been around for many, many years. We've just been told a new, you know, I find it's generally marketing messages that we're led to
Yes.
believe a way of doing something or consuming something.
Yes.
So, you know, as you say, Joe, that fantastic. You buy the butter, not in a plastic tubs.
Yeah, just do that. That's a difference.
Very simple thing. Um,
Mm.
I, I would love to understand what difficulties that you faced previously when getting some of these environmental messages into films. You know, do you think that this almost new wave of attention and urgency to the existential crisis we are facing has changed the way in which we showcase and talk about climate change? You know, I feel like there's far more documentaries now that are really, you know, looking at this issue, whereas I didn't seem to see a lot of this many years ago when it
No,
was
no.
actually important.
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually. Having gone for marine conservation into BBC and worked on the Blue Planet series, the first one, we were going to have a 6-part series that would come out at the same time that would address environmental issues. And unfortunately, Discovery were the co-funders. And when we tried to get that commissioned, they said, because Discovery is an American organization, they said, oh no, Americans aren't interested in conservation. So they wouldn't give us the money. And that is so untrue, because the people that I work with in America are just feeling as frustrated as the rest of us. My goodness, they care. And also, if people don't know, how can they care? So we ended up just doing one film, and having just come from that sort of background, I was asked what I thought the biggest issue was. And at the time, I thought it was fishing, because we could cover overfishing, bycatch, and illegal fishing. And we made a program that was called Deep Trouble, but unfortunately it didn't go out in the States, and it wasn't in the box set. It's in the DVD set now, I think, but I never had a set of that. But anyway, that's what we did. I think it would have been probably pollution development and fishing if I'd been able to add, you know, more to that list. But I stayed with the BBC for 12 years and was almost always doing underwater programs, and always wanted to get something in. You know, if we were doing films about sharks, I wanted to get the story of the decimation of shark populations. They're down by 90%. And if you don't have the top predators and everything else below that food chain, everything goes into imbalance. And the next layer of predators who aren't being picked out by the sharks, there'll be too many of them, and they will then just take care of everything beneath them, and everything goes wrong if you don't have that balance properly. But also with the finning, you know, the shark finning issue, I wanted to get that in there. But it was always the same. I would put it in, and then at the final edit, it was, oh no, our audiences just want to be entertained. They don't want bad news. And I just thought, well, how do we know unless we tell them? And so when I left, I wanted to do my own environmental film. But Blue Planet 2 was starting, and I did talk to them about the plastics thing, but it wasn't really taken on board. And it wasn't until they were in the final edit stage that David Attenborough went to one of the screenings of that, and suggested that they watch A Plastic Ocean, and that he said, why isn't plastic in your film? And then that became a massive catalyst, because finally the story of plastic went into the Blue Planet 2 environmental one. And it was just huge at getting that message out there. So it was great that they're doing it. And now there's an awful lot of environmental programs coming out of the BBC. But I wish it had happened when we did Blue Planet, because there was a shoot I was on at the end of the 90s, filming pilot whales, and we were in southern Spain where all the polytunnels are. And those straits get very strong winds, and the polythene was blowing into the ocean all around the whales that we were filming, and us, of course. And, you know, I wanted to get something in there and saying we should be showing the environmental side, but it just never happened. We also had a massive bleaching event in the Maldives, and the corals, they looked hauntingly beautiful because they were just white. It looked like something out of Disney's Frozen. But of course, it just meant that they had lost all of the Zooxanthellae, the ones that they live in symbiosis with, so they get their energy and they can live and grow. And of course, those corals have since died, and we had fantastic footage, but it never went into the film. And it's been used since, actually. But you know, I think if we'd been alerting people 20 years ago to these problems, maybe we could have been powerful enough to start getting that message going and get it as a household known fact. I feel we're kind of playing catch up now with our films, but at least it's happening. And it's also given the audiences the credibility of wanting to know and wanting to do something about it, because why wouldn't you?
So demanding more, right? Now
Yes,
that kind of the crack of light has crept through the door. You want to,
absolutely, absolutely. And people, you know, that you've got to give audiences credit. They're people who have power to do something and to make changes. And even if it is a tiny thing that you change in your kitchen, that makes you part of the solution. And we can all be part of that.
I find there tends to be, I find it's very easy to point the finger at the cause of the issue, especially when tackling solutions to the climate
Yes.
crisis, either be that government, businesses, and consumers. In terms of tackling plastic pollution, what needs to come first? Is it legislation? Is it business practices? Is it consumer demand? Or can it, or should it be all three?
Absolutely, it should be all three. And this is something that happened when we were in the edit. There were a lot of people looking at this film because it was quite a difficult one to pull together. Certainly my background is what the BBC used to call specialist factual. So you're doing the story of wildlife and you're documenting its life as it happens. Or you're doing an observational documentary when you follow the process. We suddenly had this environmental film that I thought if it went out in that sort of format, then only the people who are already interested would want to look at it. So we had to make it interesting and create this adventure story that went with it. Because I felt that everybody needs to be part of a solution. If you point fingers at people, for example, there was a possibility of pointing fingers at people like DuPont and you know, some of these big chemical companies. And if you do that, the first thing you'll do is alienate them. And people will then think, oh, it's just them causing it, I'm okay. We are all responsible for this. And I'm just as bad as anyone else. When I think of what I used to do, I used to get cross with, well, not cross, I used to ridicule my mum for hanging plastic bags on the line. And I'd say, Mum, it's okay, they give them away free. The war's over now, you don't have to be so, I mean, how ridiculous. And I'm sorry, Mum, how ridiculous that I ridiculed her for being a perfect environmentalist, you know, and I was just a teenager thinking, oh, why is she doing this? You know, it is something that we've all been part of and we can all change. So pointing fingers at one lot of people, they didn't know. Nobody was pointing out the problems of plastic in the environment and we were all buying their products. So what does that make us? You can't point it at governments. Once governments knew about it, a lot of them acted very, very quickly. Certainly when you think about the plastic microbeads, America was the first one to ban those in toothpaste and products like that. You know, we kind of caught up, and then actually UK started to do very well. But when you finally get access to politicians, they go, what, there's plastic in that? Of course we've got to do something. So once the awareness came out, there was no excuse. You might want to point fingers now, but certainly at the time, we had to get everybody on board, from the consumers to the producers to governments to the educators. Everybody had to know, and everybody can play a part, and that's what's happening.
Great, fantastic. I really do think conversations are happening across the board now.
Completely.
Forward.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about Plastic Oceans Foundation? What is your purpose, and how do we get involved?
Well, Plastic Oceans, it was a charity that started in the UK in 2009. And the reason I wanted to start it was because I realized the more I was learning about plastic in the environment, that I didn't want it to just be a film that went out, people watched it, and then on to the next. I wanted the film to have a legacy. So I wanted it to be in education. I wanted government legislation to change. So having had a background in the NGO world with WWF, I knew the changes that could be made, and I wanted to be able to do that here, but particularly on the education and awareness side. So we became Plastic Oceans UK after the film came out. And actually, you've got to keep watching this space, because we're going to be we have a big rebrand that's going to be happening in February. So you can get involved if you go to plasticoceans.uk. Make sure you go to .uk, otherwise you will end up on the wrong website. Another reason we're rebranding, to save the confusion, but we're just plasticoceans.uk. And from there you can see all sorts of things that you can do, how you can contact us, how you might want to get involved. We'd love it if you'd fundraise for us, because obviously COVID has had a big impression on our fundraising. But it's also, we are doing a trial at the moment with something called the Plastic Intelligent Framework, which looks at our habits and our mindsets and why we end up letting plastic get into the environment. And we're running that as a test at the moment with various corporations. We've got fantastic stuff for schools. If you have teachers in your family, they can download the most amazing resources for free, including films. Our latest ones that David Attenborough has front-ended for us. Sir David Attenborough has front-ended for us. And yes, they're all free. They were written by teachers for teachers. So they understand what it's like on a Sunday when you're trying to plan your lessons. This could save a lot of that. And we've tested a lot of those in schools before they came out, and the teachers and the kids were just so enthusiastic. It's been really heartwarming. So it's all there on our website.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for the listeners, I will link out within the show notes to plasticoceans.uk.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and you're part of the solution, you see.
My pleasure. Everything that we can do, as I say, the link will be in the show notes below. Finally, what's next for you, Jo? What are you most worried about, and what are you most hopeful for?
The way our organization is developing, I'm very hopeful about. We're very inclusive. We are expanding beyond plastics. I am just starting the development phase of a new film, and I can't give away too many secrets, but certainly keep an eye on that, and certainly keep an eye on the website for the rebrand. And again, everything is under wraps now. We have an amazing team. We're doing fantastic work with youth engagement, with businesses. There's so much happening and so much that I'm excited about. So new film coming, and new fun projects that people can get involved with. So do keep an eye on it.
Thank you so much, Jo, for your time today.
Taylor, it's a pleasure. It really is. Thank you for including us.
My pleasure. All the best. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you're inspired by my conversation with Jo Ruxton, please remember to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with anyone you think would love to join our community.